One of the most helpful things for a mindfulness practice is being part of a community of people who understand your experiences, who see things in a way similar to you and what your life has taught you. Let's learn a little bit more about why having these particular interest groups or affinity groups matters with your mindfulness practice. Hello and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner. I'm so glad you could be here today on this beautiful day and this wonderful walk that we're on. And one of the things that is an important part of mindfulness practice is that I sometimes will characterize it as a team sport. It's certainly something you can do on your own, and that can be very challenging for many of us. Just to have that support of a group is so important. And especially when there's a particular identity or affinity or interest that you have in common. Being a part of a shared group makes a really big difference in how you're able to engage with the practice of mindfulness and maybe see it grow in your life. So let's talk with our guest today about the LGBTQI plus community for mindfulness, and just one of the communities for mindfulness.
Our guest today is Christoph Spiessens. Christoph, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Pleasure, Ted. Thank you for having me.
And I'm very glad to. And typically I would be speaking with you about the Manchester Mindfulness Festival. And hopefully that's something you will come back and speak with me about so we can share with the listeners. But today will be a bit different a topic. But I'd like to first just learn a little bit more about you. Could you tell us a bit about your encounter with mindfulness and how that's been helpful to you in your life? How did this come about?
Sure. Long story short, I'm from Belgium originally, and I've been based in Manchester here in the UK for the past 20 years. And it was, in fact, quite a few years ago now, on a tram in Manchester on my way home after work when I experienced a panic attack. And that was the catalyst. That was my sign to do some work around my mental health, and mindfulness came back onto my path. It had been on my path because one of the reasons I came to the UK all these years ago was to join Japan Airlines as cabin crew. And I had my first introduction to mindfulness in Japan and Buddhism, although I didn't really fully understand or appreciate it at the time. So mindfulness came back onto my path, and things really happened quite quickly. I really strongly resonated with it. I found it to be very helpful. And having worked in learning and development for many, many years, I wanted to incorporate mindfulness into my corporate work and began taking courses in teaching mindfulness, and then eventually the master's at Bangor University, which I've just completed. So that's the nutshell.
Congratulations on completing.
I've not received my results yet. A few more weeks, but yeah, I've done the journey.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing that story. And it connects so much with so many of the people who are viewers here, in that some kind of distress is often part of what brings us into mindfulness, of how to deal with those difficulties that crop up in life. They do. So Absolutely. Let's skip ahead to our main topic today is how we support people in affinity groups. Yeah. In particular, we'll be speaking about the LGBTQIA plus community and the Mindfulness Network. Maybe you could say just a bit about how did that first come about at all as a community?
So I am a volunteer for the Mindfulness Network, a wonderful charity I know you're very familiar with. And so they have a rather successful Mindfulness for Men group, which I have attended on many occasions. And at one point, we had a very sort of healthy conversation around how can we grow the group, what could we do differently? And I sort of dropped this reflection into the conversation that maybe we might attract more people, but are a little bit perhaps, concerned that it's a gay group, and so that we had this whole conversation around, are we clear on who we are actually looking to attract to our gatherings? And apparently the idea to have an LGBTQ specific group had been in the pipelines for some time, and then it was just sort of a matter of finding someone who was ready to pilot it, I suppose. And so by no means is it my group. I'm just at the moment, and we are 8 sessions in. Tonight is our 8th session. I'm sort of, leading it for now, but it is really not my group. And in fact, we try to bring in different teachers all of the time to lead the practices. But so that's it in a nutshell. And it's growing with every session. We welcome more and more people mainly from the UK and the US. And we're looking into how can we grow it more quickly.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that it's growing. And as we discussed very briefly before we started recording, this is one of the important aspects of having affinity groups is it starts with someone just willing to say yes. So thank you for the willingness to step in, at least temporarily, to get things going. And I'm so glad to hear that it's growing each and every time that the group starts. And it's early on. More is certainly coming. Yeah, and I wonder if you could say a bit about what activities, what is it like? What is the group doing now, just in these very early days?
So we meet fortnightly via Zoom, and the session lasts for 45 minutes. And we do a lot of safeguarding. So we set up the session as best we can. So that includes giving people a choice around using cameras. Cameras can be on or off, and finding a posture that is going to be comfortable for them. They can practice with their eyes open or closed. So all sort of the usual safeguarding measures that one would expect to be in place. And then we sort of land together, as we tend to say in the mindfulness world. We sort of drop in. But we cater to beginners and more experienced practitioners. So it's sort of striking that balance. And then we practice, a conventional practice from the mindfulness-based program. So that could be a body scan, could be a sitting practice, some gentle mindful movement. And at the end, we invite people in some light inquiry, so some post-practice conversation. And sometimes we infuse a short teaching, and that can be through the overall theme for the practice or for the session. Sometimes that could be, for example, one of the attitudinal foundations of mindfulness that we foreground. And sometimes it can be a line from a poem that really spoke to me throughout the week, and I think actually we can go somewhere with this, and that then that seed is planted and sometimes blossoms and sometimes doesn't. And that's where my mindfulness practice comes in, this needing the session to go in a certain way, and then also noticing when it's not quite going where I thought it was going to go, and then discovering how often it takes us where we actually sort of, without wanting to sound too esoteric about it, but a place where it's better for the whole group to end up. And so it's it's learning for me and for the group. And it's never just me, by the way. We always have a second facilitator, sort of observing the group, keeping an eye on safety and comfort. Yeah.
And it's lovely to hear, and particularly just starting with safeguarding, ensuring that this is a space where people can have a sense of personal psychological safety about being able to be vulnerable, and then moving into a brave space and having that shift. And that doesn't occur without intentionality around safeguarding. And I'm wondering if you'd share a little bit about, just from your perspective, why it's important to have affinity groups where people can join and know that they're in with people who have maybe some shared understanding that others don't.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So, people from the mindfulness world, to put it bluntly, we sort of know and understand that mindfulness, to quote John Kabat-Zinn, is inherently inclusive. But there is a risk that we assume as practitioners, as teachers, that the general public will also see it that way. And therefore, we might not be aware of barriers to accessing mindfulness that many people experience, for example. They might have questions and doubts around this. They might have had a negative experience previously. All sorts of reasons. And so I think, to answer your question, Ted, if we can offer people choices, that's always helpful. And we don't force people to come along. As I always like to say, everything is an invitation, it's not an obligation. And so, yeah, I think offering people a choice can be very helpful and reassuring. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering if you'd like to share with someone who may be watching this and is wondering about the community and what it's like, what are some words of encouragement you might have around, yes, there are spaces within mindfulness where you can be yourself openly and safely.
Come and join us. Check it out. It is. I mean, I'm noticing a lot now, Ted. It would be easy to go down the cliche road, but it's true that it is designed to be a safe space. And again, it's invitational. It can be very supportive as a practice. And, what have you got to lose by checking it out? And it's, we do offer it on a donation basis. And we are a charity, so any monies that we sort of, gather through all these initiatives help make mindfulness events more accessible to the wider community. So you're actually also supporting, each other by coming along to the sessions. But of course, that too is an invitation only. It's not an obligation, and you can attend for free anytime you like. Yeah. So check it out. That's the encouragement.
And I particularly like you mentioning that this is accessible financially too, that the Mindfulness Network is really good about not putting up financial barriers and taking those down whenever possible. So thank you so much for sharing about that, and say a little bit more. Is there? Yeah.
I think perhaps in addition to discovering or rediscovering or rekindling your connection with mindfulness, perhaps this sense of community would be another reason why I would invite people to come and check out the group. And again, you're welcome to attend with your camera off. You can make skillful choices around attending in a way that works for you. You don't have to speak. You can use the chat if you wanted to contribute. So yeah, a sense of community. And from the feedback that we do receive, the word community comes back quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Our guest today, Christoph Spiessens, who will hopefully be joining us again to speak about the Manchester Mindfulness Festival as well at some point. Christoph, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I hope you got something out of today's exploration of affinity groups. And what is it like to be in a mindfulness group that is similar to you and what you're encountering? That can be incredibly supportive. Again, that diversity is a strength because it brings in so many different views and ideas and wonderful experiences to share. So, thank you so much for being here. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.